So what does all this result in? A lot of crazy stuff here, right? So you see, like, I'll just briefly go through it. But typically what happens is our bodies have these antioxidants, which are our own endogenous antioxidants. But when we have a lot of oxidative stress or inflammation, those antioxidants naturally will get depleted. So we have less protection. We also can cause some DNA damage, which is our genetics, both in the mitochondria, which we'll mention in a minute, and the nucleus. Those two areas really are important because DNA is, again, the blueprint. But what if the DNA gets damaged and it starts coding for something different, like a cancer cell, a problem, an abnormal protein? Then that's what starts to happen with the aging process. And one of the biggest points that I want you to take home is that at the end of the day, it is the reduction in the function of these little organelles that derive from bacteria many, many years ago called mitochondria. And those mitochondria produce pretty much 90% of our total energy production. So imagine you don't have gas in your car. All of a sudden, if you have a mitochondrial dysfunction or your gas is not there, you're not going to be able to produce energy or move your car. Well, that is basically what happens to your cells. And the key thing is that pretty much every single chronic disease at some point has with this some level of mitochondrial dysfunction and the ability to repair itself and to make new ones. People didn't think years ago that you can actually make new mitochondria, but we actually make them every day with some of the things we'll talk about. But if you have chronic disease, you begin to see that there's not a lot of energy being produced, and these same mitochondria that are so helpful for us can self-sabotage because they also produce free radicals as part of their function. So if they're not functioning well, they're going to start producing more free radicals and cause a vicious cycle. And then other things happen too. Our DNA, the tips of our DNA that determine our lifetime, the telomeres, get affected. They get shortened. Our ability to protect our cell membrane and the integrity of proteins gets affected, and that causes its own problems. We can get some damage because of too much excitation and hormonal changes. Long story short, there's a lot of things that happen as a result of all this inflammation and oxidative stress that leads to disease. So if you have a chronic disease, means that you have cellular dysfunction. That's what happens that leads to chronic disease. If you have accelerated cellular aging, that will lead to cell death. And again, the key thing is, the point to note, is that mitochondrial dysfunction is one of the main biological factors that's associated with chronic disease and aging. Keep that in mind. So what happens? So what happens with all this stuff? Well, you get more cancer. You get more immune problems. You get autoimmune diseases. You can't fight off infections. You get weight issues. You get diabetes. You get heart disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, aging, weakness, everything. In a nutshell, everything. This is a handout that I give most of my patients or clients who come in. This is like a little barometer for them. I kind of go through it really quickly with them, and the idea is there's 8 different areas or categories that are what I call are categories that can lead to physiological stress. So what you see here is you'll see like a category of physical stress. You'll see like pain, chronic musculoskeletal pain, medical stress, which basically means too many medications, too many procedures that causes stress on our body. Nutrition and gut health. That's a big area. You've probably all heard of the microbiome and how that impacts our gut health. Well, the nutrition is one of the biggest drivers of the changes in your bacteria microbiome. So we really pay attention to that a lot. Activity and exercise. Too little and too much. Whoever thought you can do too much exercise, but you actually can, i.e. frequent marathon runners who are not ready to do marathons, those people actually look horrible on paper. Horrible. Environmental, I mean, we live in Aggie Town, right? There's plenty of pesticides, herbicides, a lot of different toxins. So we got to keep that in mind because those are real big cellular disruptors. Genetics plays a role, and there's certain genetic situations like Huntington's disease, you can't really prevent that, but at least to note that most genetics can be influenced, thankfully. And then of course, I think most of us really don't pay as much attention to this. We always think that, oh, I sleep fine, I sleep great. Then you ask them in the morning, are you refreshed in the morning? No, not really. So well, then you don't sleep well. It's very common, and most people don't really sleep very well. Quality and quantity. And then of course, another big one, emotions. Not just like being happy, but feeling gratitude, feeling joy, spirituality, communication and community, purpose. Those are probably the biggest Max and I were talking before, she was commenting that one of the biggest indicators that she's heard about that determines longevity is community and love. So I think that that's a real big factor that I think most of us we lose that a little bit. At the end of the day, all these things here, all these issues will lead to all this crazy biology that I mentioned to you briefly before that leads to chronic disease. And that's why it's not so critical that we understand necessarily the actual diagnosis, but understand the process and the things that drive process. And that's the notion of physical, functional integrative medicine. And it works pretty well. So what are some of the basic things we do? So the first thing you want to do is always remember your foundation, like a foundation on a house. You're not going to put the roof on before you build the foundation. So what are the foundations? Support, healthy oxygenation. Sounds kind of silly, but people don't breathe very well. We tend to breathe shallow and not deep enough. And so as a result of that, we're not getting proper oxygenation. Hydration. Most of us, including me, do not drink enough water every day. And nutrition is key, which we'll talk about. The idea of elimination and detoxification. Our body's having to process a lot of stuff every day, so we've got to make sure that we take care of business there. And then the other things we want to always do is promote rest, relaxation, and repair. Because all of your repair mechanisms occur when you're actually sleeping and resting. So we promote stress reduction, optimal restorative sleep, mobility and flexibility, and then life balance. So those are the first things that we actually talk about before we do anything else. It's amazing how we have to work on that. Then, once we feel like we've achieved that goal or close to achieving that goal, then we start saying, okay, now I'm going to challenge you. Now you're going to challenge your body. So what do you mean? Our bodies are designed to be challenged. We need a little bit of stress every day. That's called hormesis. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's the notion. So that's what exercise is. That's what intermittent fasting is. They're all forms of biological stressors that our bodies will adapt to if they're ready to do so. If you do too much, you cause too much damage. If you do too little, you get nothing out of it. It's finding the happy medium. So examples of this hormetic response are intermittent fasting and mild caloric restriction, which many of you have heard about, challenging cognitive and physical exercise, and of course supplementation with very interesting cutting-edge natural supplements that have what they call hormetic type or caloric, low caloric mimetic type of agents, which we'll talk briefly about.